Jay-Z and them was putting it together. So I think they still harbor some energy. She said, were you intimate with Tory Lanez? And she said, what? And then it was like, no. And I was like, she's lying. At that point, I knew she's lying. There wouldn't be no reason for me to be around each other.
What if I told you Jay-Z might be involved in a prison stabbing meant to silence Tory Lanez forever? That's the bombshell 50 Cent just dropped, and the internet is spiraling. Tory Lanez was stabbed multiple times behind bars. Lungs collapsed, face slashed, barely alive. And now there's whispers that Roc Nation pulled the strings to keep some dangerous secrets buried. New evidence is surfacing. Old allies are flipping. And the Megan Thee Stallion case? It might not be as clear-cut as we were told. The stakes just exploded, and baby, this isn't over. Buckle up, because if these claims are true, the Tory Lanez scandal is about to make headlines all over again. Only this time, it could bring everyone down with it. Tory Lanez has just been stabbed 17 times inside prison. 17. Let that number sink in. What was first reported as a random act of prison violence has now exploded into a full-blown conspiracy that's shaking the music industry to its core. At first, the headlines were clinical. Inmate altercation, rapper injured. But the truth bubbling underneath is darker, bloodier, and far more calculated than anyone dared to imagine. Because just hours after the story broke, 50 Cent, yes, that 50, came forward with explosive receipts. According to him, this wasn't just some freak prison brawl. He's pointing fingers at none other than Jay-Z and Roc Nation, accusing them of orchestrating the attack to permanently silence Tory Lanez. Let's be clear, this isn't just rap beef. This is a power move, a strategic takedown. And if what 50's claiming is even half true, we're looking at a plot worthy of a mafia movie. The message? Stay quiet or pay the price 17 times over. So why would Roc Nation want Tory silence now? What does he know? What was he about to say? And why is the hip-hop world eerily quiet while 50 Cent throws gasoline on the fire? We're diving deep into the blood, the politics, and the billion-dollar battle lines behind bars. Because this isn't just a prison stabbing. This is a message. And somebody's trying to make sure Tory Lanez never talks again. The details surrounding Tory Lanez's prison stabbing are more than just disturbing. They're suspicious. According to internal reports, Tory didn't just get into a scuffle. He was ambushed. We're talking collapsed lungs, deep back wounds, and head trauma so severe that some insiders feared he wouldn't survive the night. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution attempt. Now, let's talk about the man responsible, Santino Casio. Not a random inmate. Not someone with a vendetta. Casio is a known violent offender serving multiple life sentences with nothing to lose. But that's exactly what makes this so chilling. Why would someone like him even care about Tory Lanez? Sources inside the prison are whispering that Casio didn't act alone. That this wasn't just about jail politics or reputation. The theory that's gaining traction? He was paid. Promised protection, money for his family, or even early privileges if he got the job done. Because here's what's really wild. Just days before the stabbing, Tory Lanez was reportedly preparing to speak publicly about new evidence tied to the Megan Thee Stallion case. Evidence that could shake up everything. But before he could say a word, he gets attacked so brutally he almost dies? That's not coincidence. That's timing. Calculated. Cold. And now, the question isn't just who stabbed Tory. It's who sent the message, and what they were so afraid he might say. Let's talk about what really lit this fire. 50 Cent's bombshell allegations. According to him, Tory Lanez wasn't just another inmate caught in prison violence. He was the target of a calculated hit. And the people behind it? Roc Nation. Yes, the powerhouse label helmed by Jay-Z, with ties to Megan Thee Stallion and enough influence to move mountains in the music industry. 50 isn't pulling punches. He's outright accusing Roc Nation of orchestrating the prison stabbing to protect Megan's image and their multi-million-dollar investment in her brand. The theory? Tory Lanez was getting ready to blow the lid off the case that put him behind bars in the first place. New evidence, unreleased footage, or even inside information that could upend the carefully curated narrative around Megan and the infamous 2020 shooting. According to insiders, Tory had been in contact with people close to the original investigation. He was compiling receipts, real ones, and he wasn't planning to stay quiet. There were whispers of an interview, a tell-all, even a documentary. And just like that, before anything dropped, he gets stabbed 17 times in prison. 50 Cent says this was a message, a warning, a silencing tactic. And here's the thing, it wouldn't be the first time the industry moved to shut someone down. But this is next level. Because if Roc Nation really did put a hit out on Tory Lanez to keep the Megan scandal buried, then we're not just dealing with PR spin. We're dealing with mob tactics in the music industry. And suddenly, that stabbing doesn't look random at all. Here's where everything starts to unravel, and where Tory Lanez's team believes the truth is finally starting to claw its way to the surface. After months of silence, Tory's former bodyguard, the one who mysteriously vanished before the trial, has resurfaced. And what he's saying, it could shake the foundation of the entire case. According to him, Tory didn't fire the gun. The real shooter? Kelsey Nicole, Megan Thee Stallion's former best friend, who was also there that night. The bodyguard claims that what happened in that SUV wasn't a man snapping in a fit of rage. It was two women fighting. Loud, violent, personal, and the gun didn't come from Tory's hands. In fact, according to this new account, it was Kelsey who reached for the weapon in the heat of the argument. What started as a verbal brawl over jealousy, betrayal, and alcohol spiraled into a physical altercation. Megan and Kelsey were going at it. Tory tried to break it up, but the bodyguard says he never had control of the weapon. Now here's where things get even more complicated, because for once, there's an eyewitness who actually backs this up. A local resident who saw the whole thing unfold from their balcony claims it wasn't Tory and Megan arguing. It was two women violently fighting outside the car. One of them pulled a gun. One of them fired. And Tory? He was on the sidelines, trying to separate them, not incite them. That testimony was mentioned in court, but it was minimized, buried beneath the media frenzy. The mainstream narrative had already been set. Megan was the victim, Tory the villain. But what if that's not the full picture? Let's talk about the forensic evidence, because this is where the case takes a sharp left turn into doubt and controversy. When the gun was tested for DNA, prosecutors expected a clear match pointing to Tory Lanez. What they got instead was inconclusive. No clear evidence of Tory's DNA on the magazine. And on the gun itself, a probability of only 0.001% that Tory's DNA matched the profile. In other words, the science says it almost certainly wasn't him. So why did the jury convict? Why was this evidence barely discussed in the media? Because the trial wasn't just about facts, it was about optics, public perception. The court of public opinion had already decided Tory's fate long before the jury ever reached a verdict. And the people in power? Roc Nation, high-powered attorneys, and a well-oiled PR machine. They made sure the world saw one version of events. A version where Megan was unquestionably right, and anyone who doubted her was silenced, canceled, or ridiculed. But now, with the bodyguard's resurfaced testimony, with an eyewitness backing the fight between the women, and with the forensic lab results showing virtually no trace of Tory's DNA on the weapon, this case doesn't look closed. It looks like a cover-up. And if Tory Lanez was stabbed in prison just as this information began to gain traction, you really have to ask, who's trying so hard to keep this buried? Because if this evidence ever gets its day in court, if the appeals process actually takes these facts seriously, we might be looking at one of the biggest wrongful convictions in hip-hop history. And somebody, maybe multiple somebodies, don't want that truth to come out. Now let's get into the part nobody wants to talk about. Was Tory Lanez ever given a fair shot? Because if you ask legal analysts and political commentators, the answer is a loud, unapologetic no. From the jump, Tory's legal team argued that the charges brought against him, especially the gun enhancement charge, were excessive. For those who don't know, that's a sentencing booster typically reserved for clear-cut cases involving malicious intent or gang-related activity. But in Tory's case, it felt like overkill. He wasn't a repeat offender. He wasn't waving a gun in the street. And even by the prosecution's own timeline, the events that night were chaotic, emotional, and murky, not the kind of situation that fits a black and white sentencing enhancement. So why throw the book at him? According to critics, it wasn't about justice. It was about making an example out of someone who challenged the narrative. Someone who didn't play nice with the industry's gatekeepers. Someone who, despite pressure, refused to publicly apologize for something he insisted he didn't do. And the timing? Suspicious. Because just as the trial picked up steam, celebrity voices started echoing the same story. Protect black women, believe Megan, cancel Tory. Never mind the facts. Never mind the inconsistencies in testimonies or the lack of conclusive DNA evidence. Once major platforms like Rolling Stone, The Shade Room, and The Breakfast Club picked a side, the public followed, and the court wasn't far behind. Now, prominent figures in the legal world are comparing Tory's case to other high-profile wrongful convictions. The Central Park Five, Cyntoia Brown, even Meek Mill. All cases where public opinion, flawed prosecution, and institutional power combined to crush a defendant. Only for the truth to come out years later, after reputations were ruined and lives were lost to the system. And let's not ignore the elephant in the courtroom, celebrity bias. Megan Thee Stallion walked in with Roc Nation behind her, industry elites backing her, and a public image polished to perfection. Tory Lanez? He walked in with a target on his back. So now we're left with a haunting question. Was this about justice or about sending a message? Because if Tory Lanez was railroaded by a system more interested in headlines than honesty, then this isn't just a credibility crisis. It's a miscarriage of justice hiding in plain sight. Let's make one thing clear. Megan Thee Stallion didn't immediately point the finger at Tory Lanez. In fact, when the police first arrived on the scene that night, she told them nothing about a shooting. No names, no gun, nothing. And that wasn't because she was lying to protect herself. It was because she was terrified. She later explained in interviews and statements that she didn't trust the police to handle the situation safely, especially not during the peak of the George Floyd protests, when tension between black communities and law enforcement was at a boiling point. In her own words, she feared that if she told the truth in that moment, someone could end up dead. Maybe Tory, maybe her, maybe everyone in that SUV. So yes, Megan lied to the police that night. But it wasn't a lie born of malice. It was a lie born of survival. And that's something we can't overlook. Because for black women especially, navigating police encounters means balancing trauma, fear, and self-preservation all at once. Now fast forward to when the charges actually came down. Contrary to what some people believe, Megan didn't press charges. The state of California did. Once medical records confirmed bullet fragments in her feet, once video footage and witness statements piled up, the state had enough evidence to act. Megan was subpoenaed. She couldn't opt out. At that point, she wasn't just a rapper in a messy love triangle. She was a key witness in a felony case. And speaking of messy, let's talk about Kelsey Nicole, Megan's former best friend. Because what happened between Megan and Kelsey? That's the shadow that looms over this whole case. The two were inseparable until that night. And since then, Kelsey's role in the shooting has become one of the biggest question marks in the entire trial. Megan later admitted that she and Kelsey had a falling out over Tory himself. That's right, both women had reportedly been involved with him romantically. Megan didn't tell Kelsey about it, which led to a betrayal that boiled over in that SUV. So when things turned violent, it wasn't just about a single moment. It was about a powder keg of secrets, jealousy, and hurt feelings finally exploding. Megan said she tried to protect everyone involved, even when it hurt her. But as the backlash grew, as people called her a liar, a snitch, and worse, she finally spoke out. And when she did, she wasn't just defending herself. She was fighting to be believed. Because in the music industry, in hip-hop, in society at large, black women are constantly told to be quiet, to take the hit, to not make a scene. Megan made a scene. She made noise. And for that, she paid a price. So even if you question parts of the story, even if you believe Tory might not have been the shooter, it's still important to understand where Megan was coming from. She wasn't perfect, but she was hurt. She was scared. And she was caught in the middle of a firestorm she never asked for. This isn't just a story about who pulled the trigger. It's a story about trust, trauma, and survival in an industry that rarely gives women, especially black women, the space to be human. This is where things go from messy to downright tragic. Because according to Tory Lanez, what happened that night wasn't just a fight, it was a meltdown. A deeply personal, emotional unraveling between three people entangled in a toxic web of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Tory has long maintained that both Megan Thee Stallion and her best friend at the time, Kelsey Nicole, were romantically involved with him. Not openly, not honestly, but behind each other's backs. And that night, inside that SUV, the truth came out in the most explosive way possible. Imagine it. A Hollywood party, alcohol flowing, egos bruised. 3 careers in the balance. By the time they piled into that vehicle, all the masks were off. Words turned to yelling. Yelling turned to threats. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, a gun went off. Now, did Tory pull the trigger? That's the million-dollar question. He's always denied it. But what he has admitted to is playing with people's emotions. Because shortly after the incident, he tweeted something that sent the internet into a frenzy. I genuinely got drunk. I was just too drunk. Nonetheless, shit should have never happened, and I take full responsibility. But the real kicker came when he privately texted Megan later, saying, "I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart. I was just too drunk. I just didn't know what was going on." Critics took that as a confession. But Tory's team clarified that he wasn't apologizing for a shooting. He was apologizing for the betrayal, for being the wedge that drove 2 best friends apart, for sleeping with both of them, lying about it, and then watching it all combust in one violent night. And here's where things get twisted. Tory wasn't just some reckless player in a love triangle. According to those close to him, he cared about both women. But in trying to have it all, he lost everything. His freedom, his career, his name. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a Greek tragedy set to a trap beat. Because when love, jealousy, and ego collide in the back seat of a black SUV in Hollywood, nobody walks away clean. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the real power behind this case. Because as much as this trial was about Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez, there's another name that kept surfacing like a ghost in the courtroom. Jay-Z, and more specifically, Roc Nation. Now, Megan has been signed to Roc Nation since 2019, and ever since, her profile has skyrocketed, from endorsement deals and brand partnerships to major award wins. But when Tory Lanez started speaking out publicly after the incident, hinting that something bigger was working against him, he didn't just point the finger at the legal system. He pointed it at Roc Nation itself. "I'm being framed. They're trying to silence me." That's what Tory supporters claim he said behind closed doors. And even in his music, the subliminals were loud. He referenced betrayal, backdoor deals, and a music industry that turns on you the second you're no longer profitable. But it wasn't just cryptic lyrics fueling the speculation. According to Tory's father, who made a fiery scene outside the courthouse after sentencing, Roc Nation was directly responsible for Tory's downfall. He accused the label of manipulating media narratives, pressuring prosecutors, and silencing witnesses. His words were clear. This was not justice. This was business. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory to some, consider this. Multiple insiders have alleged that Tory Lanez was pressured not to speak, not to perform certain songs, and not to release certain evidence. Every time he hinted at fighting back, legal roadblocks appeared. Doors closed. Show bookings disappeared. Radio silence. So here's the burning question. Did Roc Nation move to protect Megan's image? Or was this about something much deeper? Because let's not forget, Megan was in a public feud with her previous label, 1501 Certified Entertainment, at the exact same time the shooting case unfolded. Jay-Z and Roc Nation were trying to position her as the next global superstar, the face of empowerment and resilience. A scandal of this size, especially if it cast doubt on her story, could have derailed that entire investment. And Tory? He wasn't a Roc Nation artist. He was an independent powerhouse, a wild card, and in an industry built on control and brand alignment that made him a threat. Now let's fast forward. Tory's appeal? Denied. Despite questions about Kelsey Nicole's shifting testimony, despite arguments about trial misconduct, the court shut it down. And just like that, he was transferred to a California state prison to serve out his 10-year sentence. But here's where it gets interesting. New pressure is building. Online movements demanding transparency. Legal analysts calling for a deeper review of the court's process. Whispers that new evidence may come to light. And behind it all, a growing chorus of fans and insiders wondering if Tory Lanez was the scapegoat in a much larger machine. Because when Jay-Z is involved, when Roc Nation moves, it's never just about the music. It's about power. It's about influence. And sometimes, it's about erasing the people who don't play by the rules. So we have to ask, was Tory Lanez truly guilty of what he was convicted of? Or was this a carefully orchestrated play to protect a billion-dollar brand? Either way, one thing's for sure, the story isn't over. Tory Lanez may be behind bars, but don't let that prison cell fool you. The war isn't over. If anything, it's just moved underground. Because in the shadows of this so-called justice, the whispers are getting louder. Whispers of mishandled evidence, pressured witnesses, and missing surveillance footage. And while the court may have closed the book, the streets and the internet are still asking questions that no one seems willing to answer. And then there's 50 Cent, never one to hold his tongue. He's publicly clowned Megan. He's thrown shade at the prosecution. But lately, his tone has changed. Now he's dropping cryptic posts, hinting that something isn't sitting right, that there's more to this case than what we were told. And if he's shifting, you can bet more industry names will follow. Meanwhile, Megan's camp is moving on, focused on rebuilding her image, rebranding her pain into power. But the court of public opinion, still divided. Some believe she was a victim. Others see a brand being protected at all costs, even if it meant burying a man's career in the process. And Tory? He's not done fighting. His team is gearing up for the long haul, filing appeals, gathering affidavits, pushing for a retrial. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. What happens if the truth eventually comes out and it doesn't match the verdict? Because if Tory was set up, if Roc Nation pulled strings behind the scenes, if this was less about justice and more about control, then we may not be witnessing the end of a trial. We may be staring down the start of the biggest cover-up in hip-hop history. So don't get too comfortable. This isn't the conclusion. This is the cliffhanger. And the next chapter? It's already being written.